Welcome to the Recruitment Hackers podcast, a show about innovations, technology, and leaders in the recruitment industry. Brought to you by TalkPush, the leading recruitment automation platform.
I want to go back to you were telling us about the early story. You're not in Boston anymore, are you?
No, I'm in New Jersey. Like most people in New Jersey, I'm 40 minutes out of New York City. Yeah.
Boston, for those who don't come from Boston, it's not unnecessarily seen as a tech hub, but I found out over the years that it was kind of the TA tech hub of the world. 20 years ago, and I guess still today. Can you tell us about how that happened? Give us a little bit of TA tech history.
Sure. So it really, back in those days, Silicon Valley was always the hub, right? It was always where it all sort of exploded. But there used to be maps it was a map of the US, and it had Boston, and they shrunk the rest of the country, and then it had Silicon Valley. And you had your tech belt. It was the highways that went around, the two highways, 128 and 495, that went around Boston, and all the different tech shops that were either in Cambridge was a hub for a lot of startups. MIT is in Cambridge, Harvard's in Cambridge. And then out toward the suburbs, you had a lot of larger campuses for tech shops. And there was a couple of the larger employment advertising shops were out, and emerging shops, innovative shops were out of Boston. And I would say that the first one to really explode and drive traction around HR tech was Adyen, which became, the founder of Adyen was Jeff Taylor, who started Monster. And so I was at that point running that, we call it a consulting shop. We had about 60 people all around Boston, and we were dealing with some of the first e-commerce shops. And I mentioned 3Com and others. And Jeff Taylor would show up with a salesperson, Carol McCarthy was her name, and they would offer us, we partnered with them, and we would bring free postings to our customers. And we would argue with them at the time about, you've got to be on the internet, you've got to be on the web. And they wouldn't. It was a really fun time because we took employers to the web, we created their career sites, and we hooked them up with places like what was called the Monster Board back then. And at that time, the ATS market was run by a couple of shops called Resumix and ResTrack. That market, they owned the large enterprise and larger middle market on-premise software. And you had Brass Ring, which came out of the Boston area. It grew out of a resume processing company. So all the job fairs, all the resumes that came into employers were on paper, and you had these systems like Resumix and ResTrack and others. You would literally go through a factory process. They'd get scanned, optical character recognition, turned into data, uploaded in, total QC process. And then as the web was emerging, we were able to take applications to the web. That's where Brass Ring emerged, and there were some other shops on the West Coast that emerged but didn't. Taleo, which was RecruitSoft, came out of Canada, and then came down, I want to say, through Chicago to ultimately to Silicon Valley. But it was, the Boston area was teeming with, early job boards, early recruitment technology. That this was 97, 98 to 2000.
Sounds like Monster had a key role to play in that.
It really did. Like any success story, it was a combination of vision. So they could see where the market was going and how this was going to evolve before really anybody was seeing it. And timing, they were there, and hard work, right? And they had some good ideas. Now, where they ended up going, and that's a brand people love to hate on, and that's fine. But they were a major player, and they really helped create the space.
They got big, and then other problems appeared. But at the time in the late 90s, they picked that weird brand. They called themselves Monster. Everybody had a much more corporate sounding name back then. The internet was just getting started, all those .coms. And I think they did it a little bit on purpose to say, either you're with us, the internet folks, or you're against us. You're part of the old guard, and we don't need you as a customer. There's a bit of a, the boldness and the choice of brand.
Yeah, we would do all their sales hiring. They were on their first office was the second floor over a Chinese takeout restaurant. And, we'd go on site, spend a couple hours with them, with the consultants we had there. You'd leave and you would just smell like Chinese food from being in the office. And then as it started to grow, I remember telling people that they would have to, don't worry, they're expanding, they're going to have a facility, but there are 2 trailers in the parking lot for now. And the phone lines, just those, these sorts of things that I'm sure there are people out there somewhere that worked in those trailers. Well, we put them there, so.
Yeah. And so with the universities, and then maybe circumstance having, this gentleman, Jeff Taylor, starting this company in Boston for no other reason than he was there. And then many of the alumni then moved on to start their own companies. And today, I think there are a number of companies that are there, including your old employer, Bullhorn.
Yep.
I think Phenom people is headquartered there, and a number of other companies. Was Smashfly as well in Boston?
Smashfly, yep. They were founded there. In fact, the original founder of Smashfly, Mike Hennessy, he was probably employee number 3 or 4 at Brass Ring. And so we worked closely together for several years. And yeah, there's, like any of those shops, and there are still people that back in those days when we could go to events, Brass Ring is now part of IBM. And if I go by the IBM booth, I see old friends, and they've really never left. They've just went from Brass Ring to Connexa to IBM. But we used to joke and say there are probably, 300 people that are like in the industry, the core of the industry, and they just move around, and a lot of other people sort of come and go. But there are a lot more than that now, I think.
That's true. You do see that, and we hear that in your stories, that these companies don't just die, they just merge, and they move from one animal to the next, and it's a sort of Darwinian experience, right? So to see how it evolves, and they change names. And this business was Hot Jobs. I forget. Hot Jobs. Do you remember that one?
Yeah, Hot Jobs was Hot Jobs got acquired by Yahoo, and it was Yahoo Hot Jobs, and Dan Finnegan, who was the founder of JobVite, I know was involved with Yahoo Hot Jobs. And I believe the founder of Avature came out of one of those groups. Early on, when you look at Brass Ring had newspapers behind it. So the newspapers they had Excel partners out of Silicon Valley, very small stake, but over 100 million came in from the Washington Post, the Tribune companies, Gannett newspapers, which is USA Today. So newspapers were hedging their bets against, the classified business was starting to dwindle. They were looking at how that was going to go online. They also created an advertising network, which Knight Ridder became a part of, which is where Career Builder grew out of, which is also where Dan Finnegan came out of that Knight Ridder group. So you've got like different camps from the late 90s, where like the Post Tribune camp, and then the Knight Ridder camp, and then a few big brands that came out of that were all different, in some cases the same newspapers in different investing groups that were putting their chips on the table, sort of hedging their bets based on what they were expecting to see with changes and impact on their classified ad revenue. They didn't do any of it fast enough or go hard enough, as we've all seen. But that's an interesting subplot to the whole thing as well.
And with your unique perspective of seeing these people moving from place to place and companies evolving, it makes sense that you would be working in Unleash now, which is a great networker and a place where the industry meets. And I think your story is one that can serve as inspiration for people who end up in recruitment and think that, I don't want to be interviewing people the rest of my life, or, I don't want to be doing the same thing over and over again. And yeah, you can move into technology, you can move into sales, you can move into media. It touches a lot of things and it prepares you for a rich career. And if you stick around long enough, then you can see the same faces over and over again.
Good point. I used to think that it was just my great timing that and of course there was some of that. I entered the space and the internet was emerging and the web emerged and on-demand, cloud-based technologies emerged, and I'm passionate about technology. So I was in the right place at the right time. And the other thing that's true is that I think the profession has evolved and emerged, and what technology has done and what, changes that all businesses have experienced is it really demonstrates how I think recruiting can really have a massive impact. And I think if you look beyond the matches that you're making and the interviews that you're scheduling, and if you sort of step back and think about the impact you can have on the business, and if you pursue that internally in your current role or in your career moving to the next role, there are a lot of places to go with that. If you can see the impact that recruiting and recruitment technology and talent acquisition can have on the market and on any given employer, I think that's another thing that I was there to see, was sort of how this all, has unfolded, and I've been lucky to watch.
It's so important to go back to that feeling of I'm helping people get a job, and good year, bad year, God knows 2020 wasn't a great year, but still, the industry and our people to think I'm going to help somebody get their next gig.
Yeah.
I guess that's why when you go network with people who've been in the industry for 20 years, they're nice folks to be around because they have purpose in their career.